Right, so welcome everybody. Thanks very much for joining us again, and I hope that you're all safe and well in your lockdown bubbles. I've tried to set myself up this week so I will be clearer, hopefully. And yeah, we really appreciate for those, especially all of you who have joined for every 3 weeks. So like Dan said earlier, for those that just joined up very late, please remember in the chat, if you can just click who the question's to is to all panelists and all attendees. And this just means that everybody can see the question that we're applying to, and it often just makes it a lot easier for people to understand. So the last 2 weeks we've sort of talked to about how to enter data, and this week we're going to sort of explain what the data is used for, and ways you can extract your data, and then how the data is validated to make sure that the best data is in there. So a whole lot to do. As per normal, just please fire through questions as we go, and we'll type in answers. But yeah, thanks very much for joining us. So really, to start us off, I would like to introduce Susan Walker, who was a researcher in the ecosystem and conservation team at Landcare Research. And Susan was a huge part in designing the methodology of the Atlas project, and worked really closely with especially with Nikki, to develop the methodology for this project. And we really appreciate you taking your time to come on here, Susan. So welcome.
Oh no. Can't hear Susan. Can everyone hear Susan or not?
I can't hear.
Susan, I think you're just going to have to unmute yourself.
Okay. How's that?
Oh, there we go. Yep.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. No, I've got my earphones. If I lean on them, they go off. Sorry.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry. So nobody heard your first introduction of yourself.
Okay. Yes. So well, that introduction was just fine. Yeah. You asked me to talk a little about how I was involved in the past analysis of the previous atlases, so I can kick off with that, but I'll just keep it really brief. We basically just started fitting occupancy models to the atlas data that were sitting there, and there were two issues really with the way the atlas data were collected and put out there. And one was that every sheet that was collected had a different number of observers and a different number of records, and so the effort in each square was different. And so you can't just say, well, a bird was present in this square in N sheets, and therefore it was present with and just as likely to be present as in any other square with a greater number or a smaller number of observers. And so we needed to correct for effort, and that's really what occupancy modeling is about. And occupancy modeling takes it calculates a detection probability, and so you correct your presence or absence of a bird for the likelihood that the observer actually saw it, and in our case also the likelihood that the observer was actually wrong, and which is a small correction, but nevertheless you end up with an observation that of a percentage probability of occupancy, so it goes from 0 to 1. A lot of the squares where species are really absent just have a very small occupancy probability, and then those where they're definitely there and pretty much everyone who went there saw them, they come out as having a really high occupancy probability. But it's a way to compare data that are collected with citizen science, by a number of different observers over time, not to a strict sort of scientific experimental protocol. And it's a way of using those data and coming up with robust estimates of how likely was it that the bird was actually there, given the data we've got. So the other thing we had to correct for was that the two Atlas 1 and Atlas 2 were collected on different spatial scales, and so the grid squares were different, and we actually modeled the occupancy in each original square, and then we used a method called Kriging to convert them to the same spatial scale, which we used the NZMG 10 kilometre squares that are used, I think, in this third atlas as well. But you can actually convert them to any similar sort of size square. So that came out really well, and we found ourselves with, of the native birds we modelled, 64 for which we could actually derive national occupancy models. Some we did for just one island, just of course Kia and brown creeper and so on, North Island kokoko, but 64 species all up. And we've really focused from that on the forest birds to look at their patterns, but we've also got estimates for wading birds and another few groups of birds. I can show you a couple of pictures if you'd like.
Fantastic.
Yeah, wait.
Okay. How do I do this? Share screen. Right.
Share screen, yeah.
Okay. Let me just move some things I don't want you to see off the screen. Okay, so here we go. So this is it coming up?
Yep.
Yep.
Right. So here we've got rifleman. So this is kind of the classic species. There's the estimates of occupancy from Atlas 1. There's the occupancy estimates from Atlas 2. And you can see this great wipeout in the North Island and a considerable wipeout in the South Island, which, yeah, to my eyes says that the not threatened classification for riflemen in the South Island is probably a bit optimistic. They're definitely on their way out. So that's what we ended up with. And I guess the key point for creating occupancy estimates like this is that absence data is every bit as important as presence data. And if you don't know, you don't have information on where a bird isn't, if the 0 in the checklist isn't real, then yeah, your estimates of occupancy are going to be pretty shonky. And that's really important, I think, for this, for these data, because we want reliable information on what the trends in our native birds are. It's absolutely critical that the information that's coming out of these sorts of analyses is really robust. And so, yeah, it's great that the way that the Atlas data are collected really focuses on making sure we've got solid absence records as well as presence records. And that's not to say that presence only records aren't valuable. They do have a real place. But for this sort of national analysis where we want robust occupancy estimates in Atlas 1, Atlas 2, and coming up Atlas 3, yeah, really important. So yeah, I mean, I guess our hopes for Atlas 3 is that we'll be able to do this again and provide even more information on what different species are doing.
I think, yeah, you probably led into exactly what I was going to say there, Susan. What's your ambitions and feeling of Atlas 3 and where you'd like to see the data and how you'd like to see it used? I mean, the example of a threat classification and things like that. Well, I think one of the things with these data is that they are now how many years old? 2004, 16 years old, and so I think by the time we got on to creating these occupancy estimates, they were already a little bit out of date, and it was a little bit about like playing catch up, because the technology to do this occupancy modeling was only just really coming on stream. And even so, we ran these models under the desk for months because they were big Bayesian analyses and they just took a long time to chug through. With Atlas 3, I can see a much smoother and quicker way of delivering these data, but also because you've got now 3 time points and not just 2 time points, the interpretation just should be that much richer. And the other thing about Atlas 3 is that we've had large-scale pest control on the up in New Zealand. A 10K square is pretty big, but by Atlas 2, there really weren't enough 10K squares that had repeated long-term predator control for us to really see a detectable effect. We might have been seeing it a little bit in the waders, actually. There's this little orange spot when you look at the difference maps in the Mackenzie Basin, which may be Project River Recovery.
but that was about the only one. But I think coming up with Atlas 3, landscape scale pest control, we may be able to start to detect whether there are some squares which have had more predator management than others, and maybe even halo effects and things like that from sanctuaries. I think that's going to be really, quite exciting to have a look at.
Mm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that'd then actually be quite a powerful tool to lobby for further funding for, landscape scale pest control and things like that. So, an awesome thing that Atlas participants are involved in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Susan, I think it'd be just great. You sort of touched on it a little bit, and one of the things would be really neat if you could just further clarify for us again would just be the use of complete checklists in the modelling.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to say that we just threw out all the incomplete checklists. And you can blame Adrian for this. He's my co-author, but he was very short about it. He just said, no, crap data in means crap data out, and because those data are really useful. Those casual observations, those estimates of, those observations of species well outside their range, or things that are really unusual and things that are new. That there is a real place for those, but not in occupancy modeling. And it just, there is a little bit of scientific debate. There's people who say, well, we can use a bit of presence only data as long as we kind of merge it with presence absence data, but the result is always messy and the interpretation is always a little bit dubious. So just bear in mind that there's just these two different types of data with very different purposes, and I think the same if we get casual observations without robust absence estimates in the third atlas. Those will be probably meeting the same fate as soon as they meet Adrian. Sorry. Yeah. But there may be in time some way, but the problem is that those data are actually just missing information. There is some information there that is just not there, and you're going to have to make assumptions in order to actually invent whether it was really absent. And so you're then leaning on the usefulness or the the accuracy of those assumptions instead of the real noise. Yeah.
It's kind of what we've been talking to everyone on the webinar and everyone who's got in touch as well, is that sort of talking about the sort of that increase in assumptions into the data, which is something obviously we want to avoid, particularly for the occupancy modeling that we're hoping to undertake. So that's awesome that you've mentioned again how almost savage Adrian was with it.
I mean, I feel as if I should share some good news, really, because that's such a bleak picture. I mean, I just do want to say that these data have been just an absolute goldmine. The insights that came out of them were huge, really. They turned me from a botanist into someone who's interested in birds, but they also just revealed, I think, what we all kind of knew, but had no real national data to show us, which was that our forest birds, especially our deep endemic forest birds, were wiping out of forests, especially warm forests, and that's a huge story. And without these atlas data, we wouldn't really be able to nail that one. And it's a huge story too, because it goes into the so what does New Zealand do about this and where should they act? The other thing that's been coming out of the analyses we've been able to do with these data is also a future looking sort of thing. So what happens when we do pest control across the landscape? Because birds with different traits respond differently to pest control, and they respond differently in different places. So it's given us real insights for which birds will do well if we do predator control where. And so that's another really important thing for managing expectations out of a predator-free New Zealand. Where should we put that effort, and what can we expect in landscapes that don't provide birds with forest cover, for example, or where is it that some of our bigger, more food demanding birds are going to do best. You don't want to just do all your pest control in cold beach forests, for example, if you're trying to bring back South Island kokako, or even kaka. They're a big greedy bird. They're going to need you to concentrate on those difficult warm forests. So and then you're not going to expect those big birds and kiwi and so on to just stroll back into deforested landscapes either. They need forest, and so those insights are really, really important. And there's only one data set in New Zealand that can really provide that kind of understanding at a national scale, and that's this one.
So yeah, thanks, Susan. It's a real hats off to Birds New Zealand members and all those past people that participated in those previous two atlases to get us where we are, and to set the platform for this next one going forward. I think there's been quite a few questions. You've covered all the points we really wanted you to nail, so thank you very much for your time. There's been quite a lot of questions coming in, and Sam and Pat have been dealing with those, but I wonder now if there's a chance, Pat or Sam, for you to raise any of those questions you think that would be good to get Susan to answer what we've got her here. Thank you.
Everything that's come through the Q&A has been unrelated, so no questions of mine.
I've just got a question from Marie Louise, who said she missed why some of the data was disallowed and just wants that clarified, if you can.
Okay, well, the data that the data in the two Atlas 1 and Atlas 2 data sets are classified as either complete sheets or not complete sheets. And so a not complete sheet meant to us, and I'm putting it in our terms sort of as receiving the data, as the person who completed that sheet or who filled in that sheet wasn't sure that they had recorded every bird in that square. And so we didn't know which birds were absent from that square. It was an incomplete list, and so your absence information is unreliable, and you're going to have to make assumptions that the bird wasn't actually there but just wasn't seen. And so, yeah, that's why we disallowed those data, because they mean that our occupancy estimates are going to be inaccurate.
Yep. We've got another question from Richard, sort of talking about the importance of abundance data in checklists. Can you maybe talk about that a bit, Susan? Because I think there's definitely prevalence, with like rare species. There's like, there's two really, really rare shorebirds or something like that. There's a whole lot of focus, but then maybe there's like, I don't know, 100, there's like 50 house sparrows or whatever it is. So, but how important is it to make sure that the abundances are as accurate as possible?
We don't use abundance data at all for these occupancy estimates. And I think one of the problems for a big citizen science program like this is that estimates of abundance are really hard. They're hard to get as repeatable, reliable estimates. So you need to use a technique like distance sampling, which I don't know if any of you have done, but it's fairly tedious, and it's something that really needs to, it really needs quite a bit of application to do well. And so, I saw a flock of 20 birds, or, I think that there's this many per hectare. Those sorts of estimates are going to vary hugely between observers, and we don't know how. We don't know how those, someone will look at a flock and say, well, there's 30, or someone will say, well, I estimate over the square there must be 20 per hectare. We just don't have an easy way of estimating abundance for every bird in every square that is repeatable across observers and that is doable. And so I suppose that's disappointing for some people because it feels like the atlas isn't actually being as ambitious as it might be, or it might, that our analysis of the atlas data isn't being as ambitious as it might be. But I think pragmatically, you know, my view would be that if we've got occupancy data, we know that that's robust. And if we venture into trying to work with abundance data that's collected differently by different people across the country, we enter a bit of a, a nest of problems, and will be very difficult to sort out. So I guess my ambitions are smaller than that, I think. But I also think that you can get a heap out of presence, absence, and occupancy data that is really valuable.
Yep, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Susan, for your time. It's been, you're so instrumental in helping get the atlas methodology up for this one. So, we appreciate all the time you put into that as well, and for coming on. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Cheers,
Bye.
mate. Daniel.
Yep. Susan, are you okay? Are you happy to leave on your own, or? There you go. Perfect. All right. Yep. So I was just answering all those questions. Great. Yeah. So thank you to Susan again. It is always interesting, and we really appreciate her being on the call and providing that perspective from one of the many sort of important end users of the data. And so, yeah, it's pretty good. If you do have any further questions for her, I'm sure if you just email them to us, either, if it's later on this evening or if you sort of something pops up in your head, email them to us if you sort of have a specific question for Susan, and then we'll try and forward them on and see if she can at least answer them for us and then get back to you. If you do want to sort of watch more of Susan talking about the Atlas and Atlas data, I did have the pleasure of interviewing her last year for the launch video of the Atlas. So that launch video with her interview in it is on our YouTube channel if you wanted to do that as well. I'm going to be talking about the value of your checklists essentially, and what you sort of provide every time you hit submit. So I am going to share my screen, so you're not staring at me, and we're going to talk about some of the stuff that has come out from eBird data. As I say, one of the big things that we kind of want to talk about here is the bigger picture. So every time that you submit a checklist to eBird, to the Atlas, you are making your observations available to not only New Zealand, but also a global community of researchers, of educators, conservationists, birders, and anyone else with an interest in birds, which, when you kind of think about it, is immensely, it's pretty awesome, and I find it pretty amazing to think of that every time that I'm submitting a checklist. eBird data it's playing an increasingly important and diverse role in the conservation domain. In 2019, for example, there were over 300 peer-reviewed scientific publications that to date that had used eBird data. And this is all available on the portal. So what I'm doing is sharing my screen here. So you'll see at the top here, it says science. So if you click here, you get to this page and you sort of get this very visually stunning map. And all of this information that I'm going to be talking about, and far, far more, to be honest, is here. So highly recommend make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and sort of go into the portal and having just have a look through and read some of the stuff, because it's pretty awesome. So in terms of the publications, you can scroll down here and there's heaps of stuff here. And if you click on publications, it gives you a list. There's an actual list of all of these publications that have used eBird data for their scientific analysis. To put it in sort of a New Zealand aspect as well, SAM has recently used eBird data to supplement bird counts on the Miramar Peninsula. So she got the eBird data from either resident birders or visiting birders to the Miramar Peninsula in Wellington. And that supplemented the bird count data that goes into the Miramar Peninsula bird monitoring that WMIL undertakes. And so that's going to help assess sort of the bird diversity before, during, and after the predator eradication that is currently underway. And so that's a New Zealand example. What I kind of wanted to show as well is some global examples, so kind of picking out some of these papers, because I thought it was really, really interesting, and again, just to show you the power of this data. So you'll be able to see these 4 papers. So this one here is by Chavez et al. So that was last year. This is used eBird data to show the impacts on wetland water bird species composition before and after an 8.4 earthquake in Chile. And that helped show that they're actually immensely resilient. This paper here in top right corner, Callahan et al., 2019 again, that was using citizen science data, so eBird data, to look at restoration projects within urban areas. So as Susan was talking about, sort of reforestation projects, and using eBird data there. This paper here was using it to look at the wintering range of broad-winged hawks in South America. Again, they found a range extension like 700 k's southwards, and also some new cases in Argentina and southern Brazil. So sort of looking at a species' range. This final one is really, really cool. I sort of wanted to talk about this one because they used eBird data to look. They established the wetlands that migratory shorebirds were using, and then they used that to work with landowners to create temporary wetlands and protect certain areas on those on their land to sort of create the habitat for these migratory species. So that's really, really cool. And essentially, I just wanted to show those just to kind of give you sort of tangible examples of where eBird has sort of been used to help in conservation of bird species. Because in a nutshell, you are supporting this research. You're supporting, you know, species population assessments, habitat protection, and ultimately helping inform policy around bird conservation. One of the biggest hopes for this atlas for all of us and many of us is that this is going to help inform and improve bird conservation management in New Zealand, possibly for decades. So as Susan talked about, you know, it's a gold mine. It's a real valuable data set to a lot of people, not just Susan, but a lot of people. One of the biggest issues, of course, is the gap between knowledge and action. And so Cornell is committed to making sure that your data gets put to the best use possible, essentially, in closing that gap. And the New Zealand Bird Atlas echoes this. So every complete checklist that you enter will inform the analysis and modeling that is undertaken after the 5-year data period. So I'm going to stop waffling. I'm going to show you some cool maps that have been produced from the eBird data, again to show the bigger picture, and just to, yeah, it's a bit of a mind-blowing sort of set of maps that they've produced. So I'm going to open up this one first, which is of barn swallows. I'm just going to play this here, but what this map is showing is the relative abundance. It's an estimated relative abundance of barn swallows over the weeks of the year. This is all from eBird data. So this is through the year as they move up north for the summer period, and then as they migrate down through Central America, down into South America. This is not only incredibly amazing, but it's a very, very powerful tool for conservation specific to this species. What we kind of wanted to talk about was, obviously this is a North American or an American continent species, but if you think about in the New Zealand equivalent, you think of species like wrybill, black-fronted terns, saipo, are resident migratory species. Having something like this on a national scale for those species would be super valuable. And again, your eBird checklists will contribute to that. So that's one species. I've got 4 to show. So this one here is of a species of gull called Bonaparte's gull. So just here, again, North American, because this is all, these are all North American products. Again, sort of showing during the spring, it's at the coastal areas, and then the species moves north into the inland areas around sort of the Great Lakes. And then autumn, December, coming back to the coastal areas for the winter. Again, New Zealand equivalent, you think of red-billed gull, black-billed gull, you know, the movements of these species, we will be able to sort of look at how these species are moving around in New Zealand. And then possibly relating that to, you know, food distribution, climate, anything else like that. So again, a really, really cool example just of a different species group. Third one that I wanted to bring up, maybe not as exciting for many of you, but the humble house sparrow. Again, I just wanted to show this one because A, it's really, really important that you put house sparrows into your checklists, but also to kind of show that, yeah, although it's not a migratory species, it's not going up and down the whole continent, but there are differences in the abundance, and there is differences in the distribution. So again, you know, you kind of think of a New Zealand equivalent, how are house sparrows, how are other passerines in the country moving around, and you know, using eBird data, we can have a look at these and we can answer quite interesting questions and quite important questions. So again, that's just another example of a different species. The final one that I just wanted to talk about was yellow warbler. This is a beautiful warbler in the Americas, and again, this is just even more powerful than barn swallow, but again, just showing that summer migration up way up into the north parts of the American continent, and then back down for the winter. Again, you think about the sort of value of that for our migratory species, and for species that are coming out, you know, on a global perspective, bar-tailed godwits, even banded dotterels, you know, moving across Tasman to Oz, you know, we'd be able to have a look at that. So just wanted to show those just to provide sort of that illustration of the bigger picture. These are all available for people to have a look at online. All of these products, as I said, are limited to the Western Hemisphere because that's currently where the highest density of eBird data is, and probably arguably birders as well. And so, you know, the hope is that these, well, probably they will just extend globally as there's more and more data put into the eBird database. I think we can all agree that these are pretty amazing and something that we'd love to have for New Zealand species. Obviously, this is on a continental scale, so you think about on a national scale how you know, high resolution these could get to. So those are available if you wanted to have a look. Again, highly recommend making yourself a cup of tea and diving in. If you just click the green button here, you can explore all of those, and it brings up a list of 610 species that you can have a look at. When you click on one, so I've brought up here, humble Canada goose. Again, you sort of get this abundance map looking at the seasonal sort of distribution and abundances of the species across the continent. Again, think how valuable this would be for New Zealand. And again, this is what your eBird checklists are contributing to for New Zealand's birds. Our ability to undertake this analysis for the atlas continues to depend on contributions of people like you. So we always say it for people coming on the webinars, but also for people who get in touch. We really, really do appreciate you contributing to the atlas. It means a lot, and it's not going unnoticed. So please do, you know, obviously just keep on atlasing. And the final point that I just wanted to talk about is something that Susan has just talked about as well. If I bring this map up again of the yellow warbler, you see here it talks about that this map animates weekly estimated relative abundance, and it's defined as the expected count on an eBird traveling count, starting at the optimal time of day with the optimal search duration and distance that maximizes detection of that species in a region on a specified date. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I just wanted to break that down for you. Essentially what it's saying is that there were checklists that had to meet certain criteria to go into the analysis. So exactly what Susan was talking about. It has to be a complete checklist to go into something like an occupancy modeling analysis. So what I wanted to bring up now, just as my final point, No, I've just been waffling on a little bit, but is of what allows a checklist that you submit to qualify to go into things like the occupancy modeling or abundance map or distribution maps or anything like that. So the checklist needs to meet a certain amount, sort of criteria, and these are sort of summarized here. So the checklist obviously needs to be submitted within the 5-year period, so the 1st of June 2019 to 2024. Checklist obviously has to be within the New Zealand region. That's not just the North and South Islands, it's also Antipodes, Bounties, Chathams, just the whole region. Complete checklists, again, what we're talking about for anyone who's new this week, but also just to repeat it, it's a list of species that you were able to detect and identify by sight or sound, without intentionally leaving anything out. The checklist used either a traveling or a stationary protocol, so either you were moving or you were standing in one place. They weren't incidental and they weren't historical. They were split into roughly hour-long checklists, and traveling checklists were split into roughly 1 kilometer sections. So again, those 2 points, what Mike was sort of talking about, is that increase in resolution over time and space just makes it far, far more accurate. This point as well is containing information on the start time, the duration, your protocol, number of observers, and the distance traveled. So what it was just talking about in that abundance map. And the final point is accurate counts of species were available, i.e. it wasn't just present. You didn't just put an X to say it was present. Obviously, looking at this list is probably quite daunting. You think, oh my God, that's a lot of things to remember. But what's amazing, and one of the many reasons why we use eBird, is the majority of this is captured by the app. So when you hit that green button, a lot of this stuff is captured for you. And so it allows you to just crack on with what we all love to do, which is birding. And you know that the online form as well is structured as well to capture all this information. So these guidelines, best practices, golden rules, whatever you want to kind of call them, are something that we as the Atlas team are sort of advocating and encouraging every Atlas participant to remember and to use for their checklists, and something that we can all be following very, very easily. And just something to think about as well. Obviously, we're in lockdown and going through the pandemic, but we should all be taking this with us when we eventually are able to go abroad, whether it's visiting family in Europe or going over to Australia or North America. Think of all the support that you can provide to NGOs, researchers, ornithologists by submitting really high quality checklists that are complete and accurate. And that's just while you're on holiday. So something to think about and keep you going through this lockdown. So I've talked a lot, and probably some of you are probably kind of thinking along the lines of, well, how do we keep this all accurate? And that's a very, very good question. And Susan touched on it. And so Sam is now going to kind of go through how eBird ensures that the data that is submitted is as accurate as possible.
Yeah, we want to make sure that the data submitted to the Atlas is of really high quality. So to ensure this, eBird and the New Zealand Bird Atlas has a process to make sure that every record is evaluated and that the data really is going to be this high quality. And it involves having automated filters in the database and having volunteer reviewers checking data as well. So I'm just going to quickly take you through how these work. So the first step in the review process is the automated filters, and there's like 5,000 of these active for each checklist that's submitted. So these automated filters check each species on your checklist. They'll check the count for each species, the location, and the date of your checklist. And any record which is unusual are then flagged for review. So observations which are flagged could be flagged for any of the following reasons. So it could be a rarity, so a species which is rare or unusual in that region. It could be out of season, so a species reported outside of its normal date range, or a high count, so a species count which is higher than the maximum you'd expect to find on that date in that region. I'm just going to show you how these filters work. So I'll just share my screen with you. Okay, guys see that all right? So
Yep.
yeah, I have the Atlas portal, and I've just got a mock checklist here for Blenheim, for my place in Blenheim. So we just see that as my checklist, and I've gone to submit it, but it hasn't actually gone through, and that's because I've got some unusual records that have been flagged. So these are just up the top here, and it just says needs details. So these records need a bit more information before I can send them through. So for these flagged records, you need to provide some more information for it to be verified and added to the database. So this can be in the form of comments describing the plumage you saw, the location and the behavior of the birds. You can also add media, so that's like photos, audio and video to supplement these unusual records as well, but you can't do that until after the checklist is submitted, and Dan showed us all how to do that last week. So you need some more information on how to do that, go back and check last week's webinar. You'll also get this in the app as well. So when you get to the review screen, any unusual records will be flagged and you'll have to enter this extra information as well. So my first example here is flagged because it's an unusually high count for Paradise Shelduck in Blenheim. So I just have to give a bit more information about this count. So in this details box, I'll just add some comments in here. And you want to describe the species. So we're sure this is the species we saw. So write down all the features that you noticed about the bird. So we know it definitely was that bird. And then also some information about how you counted the birds so that you know this is definitely the count that you got. For example, for this bird, it might put flew overhead. Saw the black-head and dark body of males, also white-head and chestnut body of female. So it's just describing the species when I saw them. That's how I identified it as a Paradise Shelduck. I'll just add some information about how I've counted the species. So counted as 12 blocks of 50 to get an estimated count. So in this instance, when I've seen the birds fly over, I've just counted them in blocks of 50 and added that up to 600 birds. And that's how I've verified that this is the number of birds that I've got for this record. So it's fine to do estimates for large counts as well, just so long as you're in the ballpark of the number of birds and you're not too far over or too less. So yeah, the description you need to write for a unusually high count. And then the second example I've got here is for a rare species. So Occulito brown kiwi is a rare species for the Blenheim region. So again, I just need to write some details in this details field to describe the species, to say that I definitely did see the species. So what I observed was brown bird with dark streaking, long pale bill, and also that it was probing my garden at night. In this instance, I've described the plumage of the bird and its bill, so that's quite distinguishable features for kiwi, as well as some behaviour there that tells us, yes, this was a kiwi that I saw in my garden. Just to reiterate, this isn't actually a real checklist. There was no kiwi in my garden, but this is just to show you how these filters work. So you just want to add enough information to distinguish this as a species you saw and that it wasn't something else, and also if it was a high count, how you got this count. So this is just some examples to show how the filters are working. It's also important to remember that these filters do get tweaked and reviewed, so don't get frustrated if a species gets flagged, which isn't actually unusual or rare. They will get updated. So yeah, that's all right. So once you're happy with your descriptions, you just need to submit that checklist through. And then these flagged records will go into a database where an eBird reviewer will evaluate each of these records. So an eBird reviewer are birding experts who they volunteer their time to manage the filters and review records. So they've got lots of birding knowledge and eBird knowledge, and they're a really important part of the review process. And the eBird and New Zealand Bird Atlas wouldn't work without these reviewers. So we're really grateful for all the time and effort they put into reviewing all the records. So as I said, the reviewers go through each of these flagged records in the database. And if there's enough supporting information to verify the flagged records, then it will be accepted by the reviewer, and then it appears in the public Atlas dataset. And if you've got a really good description there or have media, then this can be a really quick process. But if there isn't quite enough information, then the record is left as unconfirmed, and it will only appear in the totals list for the observer. But the reviewer will get in contact with you and ask for a few more details so that they can verify this record. So if a reviewer does contact you, don't take it personally. They're just trying to get a wee bit more information about your record, just to make sure that the data is really high quality and make sure that everything going into the database is accurate. But yeah, that's how the reviewing system works.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. So now for the final section, I'm going to chat about what you can do with eBird data. And I'm going to share my screen here. It's coming up there.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about three things in this section. First is going to be exploring species maps. Then second is going to be downloading your own personal eBird data. And finally, downloading larger data sets, so for an entire region or for a species. These are just three of many, many things that you can do with eBird data, but there's three ones that I think will be interesting and quite useful for the people watching this. I'm just going to quickly show this diagram here. So I'm going to, this is sort of a diagram showing the nesting of the portals, just reiterating that point that we've made in previous webinars. So data that's entered into the Atlas portal does also go into the nationwide New Zealand eBird portal that's been around for a lot longer, and that then does also feed into the global eBird portal. And it doesn't work the other way around. So data that's going in here won't show up in the Bird Atlas. Now I'm just showing this because I'm going to show some species maps from this level. So the New Zealand eBird level. So that's data that's going back. Some of the data is over 100 years old. That's been entered as historical checklists. You can, if we just go in here, explore species maps on the Atlas portal, but that's only going to contain data that's been submitted since the 1st of June 2019. So what I want to show, just to show the power, I guess, of the species maps, is show you species maps from this level, which include data that goes much further back. So you can find species maps just by going to the Explore page and then scrolling down and clicking on the species maps. And this opens up this map of the world. And here you can enter in, I'm just going to scroll down to New Zealand here, and you can enter in literally any species that you want. So just to show you some examples, I'm going to have a look at pipit. So we type that in, click on the species when it comes up, and then we get a cool looking map like this. These shaded squares are just showing the frequency that they come up. The frequency that pipits are being reported in complete checklists. So that's only taking complete checklists into account with these grid squares. Darker grid squares obviously indicate it's a higher reporting frequency of pipits. And then these blank ones, there haven't been any pipits recorded from. So as we zoom in, just going to zoom into Auckland, you'll see that these shaded squares actually eventually turn into points here. And these are the actual observation locations of pipits. And we can just scroll around the map and have a look anywhere. The different, the key for these points, you'll see different coloured points. There's a red one there, and also different images inside them. So the red ones represent observations that are very recent, so probably, I think it's within the last month. So this one here, yeah, it was 29th of March. Blue ones are older ones, and then the ones with the little flame image in the middle, they are birding hotspots. As you go around, you can click on any of these. So this hotspot here, you can open that up and there's a checklist in there. Or here, and we can click on that there, and that opens up the whole checklist as well, which we could have a look through. And as we can see, pipits down there. As you zoom out, it goes back to that shaded, those shaded grid squares. And if you did want to see the points rather than these grid squares, you can click over here, this little box here, show points sooner, and it's going to turn those shaded squares into points. These just take a little bit longer to load, so if you want to move quickly over the map, I usually recommend unticking that. What else is cool with these maps is you can use these filters up here that change the timing of observation. So at the moment it's year-round, all years. So this is every observation of a pipit being entered into eBird for New Zealand. We can change this to year-round current year. So that's, and then click set date range there. So this is going to show us only observations from 2020. At the same time, you can have a look, just say you were interested in looking at pipit distribution or the differences you might see between seasons. So here you could select December to February, so summertime, click on all years, and then that's just going to give us all the observations of pipits over the years during the summer. And at the same time, we could then have a look at the winter, and you could see possible differences in the distribution of pipits. So that's pretty cool. There's a New Zealand species there we're having a look at, but I'm going to now show you a species that ranges a bit further. So I'm going to look at a seabird, fish-footed shearwaters. So we just type in the species up there and click on that, and then it's we're still on the filters. I'm just going to go to year-round, all years. And now we've got all the observations of fish-footed shearwaters. This is, as you probably all know, this is a species that breeds mainly on islands around North Island and also Australia. So as you kind of expect, a lot of the observations are more northern. Another little tool you can use when exploring these maps is this full species range up here. So you can just tick that, and that will take you out to the whole range of that species. And in this case, because it's a species that migrates to the northern hemisphere for the winter here, we can see that there's plenty of observations all around North America and Japan, and then even India and the Middle East. Another little tool you can use is on the right hand side is explore rich media. So as it says below there, this only shows locations with photos, audio, or video. So I quite like using this one sometimes, just to have a look at pictures from various birds around the world. So when you do that, as you can see, all the blue dots and red dots have now changed to these three things, which yellow with the P represents photos, blue with the V is videos, and pink is audio. And it's the same thing. You can just click on any point and that brings up this little pop-up box, and then you could open the checklist and have a look, and there we see a nice photo of a flesh-footed shearwater. Again, just like we did with the pivots, we can also look at differences between, I'll just untick the rich media, so now we've got all the observations of flesh-footed shearwaters, and we can look at differences between times of year. So I'm going to just go with a custom range. So I tick that box down there, and I'm going to look at May through to September. So the species breeds in New Zealand and Australia during those warmer months, and then from May to September we would expect not many observations around New Zealand, as the bird's probably going to be off in the northern hemisphere. And as you can see there, that pretty much agrees with the species biology. Very few records up there, and loads along North America and Japan and India there. So these maps are really, really cool. You could spend hours looking at them and going all over the world and looking at different species. So I recommend you have a play with them, try them out, and I'm sure you'll find some interesting stuff. Next, I'm going to go on to downloading your own personal data. So this can just be done by going through to My eBird, and we've shown you this page in previous webinars, which is where you can manage your checklists and edit them, change them. And if you just scroll down, you can click on Download My Data. And when you do this, you just need to request it, and then you'll be emailed a Excel spreadsheet, which has literally all your observations that you've entered into eBird, all tabulated for each single observation of every species that you've done. So in some cases, this can be quite a large file if you've contributed a lot of checklists. What we say to people is this can be used as sort of a repository for your own personal birding data. So if you're putting all your bird observations onto eBird, they will all be saved and they're available. It's your data, is available to be downloaded, and you can do with it as you please. We've also suggested to people this is a real good way of storing data for larger groups. So for example, Birds New Zealand regional groups, most of them have their own eBird account, and if all the data is being put onto that account or shared with that account, then that can all be downloaded and used. Also, community tracking groups that are doing their own bird monitoring, like 5-minute bird counts, that would be a perfect example of a place where you could store the data and then download it for analysis. And even larger groups like the Greater Wellington Regional Council upload all their bird data. They've got over 5,000 checklists that they've contributed. So I'm just going to show you, I downloaded my data just the other day, and just sort of personal interest, I plotted it on a map, just make this full screen, and overlaid the Atlas grid squares on it, and calculated which ones I've done checklists in and which one I haven't. So this was purely just out of personal interest. It's something that I endeavour to survey all the grid squares in Marlborough, and as you can see, I've still got a lot to go. But we're not even 1 year yet, so there's plenty of time. And this is just completely for my own personal use, and there's loads of other uses for your data, but I just thought I'd share that one with you. So the next and final thing I'm going to talk about is downloading larger data sets. So this isn't just your personal data, this is all the data that's been contributed to an entire region or for an entire species. So to get to this data, you go to ebird.org/data/download. Dan's going to put up a link there for me, I think, for anyone, but you can just browse through eBird and you should be able to come across it. So this is open data, it's open access, freely available for anyone to download. All you have to do is come to this screen, and here you'll have a request data, so you do have to, you request the data from Cornell, and all you have to do is put in a small summary or abstract of what you intend to use the data for. And these are typically processed within 24 hours, and they'll send you a link. And then, as you can see, I just requested it a couple of days ago, and I've got access until next year, for a whole year. I'll just point out that the download is only available for non-commercial use. And when you do download it, there is anything that you download, there's a terms of use, which you should have a read of if you do intend to use the data thing. And also information about citations. So if you were going to use the data to publish papers, which is fine, just making sure you have the correct citations in there. Beware when you download, the files can be really big. You can actually download the entire eBird data set, and it comes in a highly compressed form, but it's still over 90 gigabytes. If anyone out there is familiar with R, the statistical computing program, then Cornell have developed a bunch of R packages which help process these really large data sets. But for smaller ones, you can just request, say, for a certain region or a certain species. They're not too bad, and you can just open them up and then as an Excel spreadsheet. So I did this just the other day, and I downloaded all the data for the Wellington region for about the last 10 years or so, and plotted kaka and tui distribution over time. So I'm about to show you some maps. They're certainly not as fancy as those nice ones that Dan showed you earlier, but I think are still pretty cool and still show you the power of eBird observations in New Zealand. So this should just sort of cycle through. Is that working, guys?
Yep.
Yep. So these are just the observations for an entire year. The little red star there is Zealandia. This map's showing kaka, I should say that, which were translocated into Zealandia between, I think, 2002 and 2007. And then seem to have sort of spread over the whole Wellington region from there. And as you can see, those observations kind of show that. What I noticed when I did this was particularly 2019, there seems to be a massive explosion, which I think ties in with the Atlas, coinciding with the Atlas starting in 2019. So these observations, this is just literally every kaka observation, so it's not accounting for effort. And we already know, we've seen lots of graphs that show the number of checklists being submitted to eBird has increased significantly, almost exponentially over time. So directly comparing 2011 to 2019 this way isn't the best science, but it still shows quite a cool map anyway, and shows a bit of expansion. I did look further into this trend, and I looked at just the complete checklists. So those are the ones that we're constantly advocating people to submit. So complete checklists, and looking at the percentage of complete checklists that kaka and I did tui were present in. And so this allows us to do direct relative comparisons between years. So it's accounting for effort because it's a percentage. And as you can see there, it does seem like kaka have sort of from 2016 especially sort of started increasing quite a bit, which is really cool. And then we see the same thing with tui, going from being present in sort of 25% of checklists all the way up to over 50%. And this is something that we kind of expected because tui are, you know, a species that's greatly benefited from the likes of Zealandia and community trapping around the Wellington region. And as you know, they're pretty conspicuous, and anecdotally, people in Wellington have said they seem to be increasing in distribution and abundance. And so I've also made a map, just zoomed out a little bit further, very similar to that Kaka one, which kind of shows this. I'll just let that cycle through a few times so people can have a look. Yeah, so that's basically, you know, that's just showing you some pretty simple analysis, some eBird data that's been contributed by people like you and me, and showing just a few of the quite cool things you can do. So I don't expect everyone will be interested in downloading big data sets and trawling through them, but I do highly recommend to people that you have a look at those species maps under the Explore page and have a play around with them, because that's pretty cool stuff, and I personally find it very interesting, and I'm sure you will too. So thank you, and I think that's about it for me.
Perfect. Yep. Thanks a lot, Pat. So that's everything we've got to talk to you about this week. Next week, in the last of our 4 series, we're going to be looking at using the resources we've got available, particularly the Explore Atlas pages and effort maps on the eBird Atlas portal to help plan field trips and things like that. Hopefully we're heading towards a time when we're going to be able to go a little bit further than around the block. So I really recommend people come along to that one to learn how we can use all these resources we have to plan future trips. So yeah, well, hope you can join us. And as in all previous weeks, we're happy to stay on here for as long as people want and have questions to ask us, and we'll do our best to answer them. So yeah, thank you, and stay safe out there, everybody.
One quick point I just wanted to put in that I apologise, obviously I didn't sort of communicate well, was talking about the time and length of checklists. So sort of talking about splitting checklists into hour-long sections or 1 kilometre sections, and that's it means no more than an hour, and it means sort of no more than roughly a K. So if you want to do a 5-minute checklist, it's absolutely golden. If you want to do a 25-minute checklist, that's fine. 47 minutes, it's golden. It's just trying to split those longer sort of sessions into more manageable chunks. Same with traveling. You know, you can either be stationary, you could travel, I don't know, 250 meters, 740 meters, whatever it is. It's just trying to split those sort of long, what would normally be a sort of really, really long checklist into sort of more higher resolution chunks. So I just wanted to, yeah, just repeat that because that came up a few times. Karen, I just read your comment. That's awesome. Yep, that's great, and we're really, really glad that the webinars are helping. For anyone who's new this week, please do head to the portal, and if you click on About, and you'll see a link for webinars. There's all of the links to the first one, the second one, and it will be for this one as well, because this is being recorded and will be made available. And there will also be a link to register for next week's webinar as well. That will be available pretty much by the end of this evening. I'll have had that all ready and ready. So please do, yeah, we hope that heaps more people will be feeling like they want to join us again for next week, because yeah, it's pretty cool looking at planning Atlas trips. Maureen, where can one see which areas need lists to be done? This is going to be something, yeah, that's a great question, Maureen, and it's something that we are going to be covering quite heavily next week. But essentially, if you wanted to have a look, or before next week, to sort of do a bit of homework, it is the Atlas effort map, which is on the Atlas portal. If I just share my screen now, I can show you that, where you would find that. So on the Bird Atlas portal online, if you click on Explore up here, you'll just see it. It's next to the Submit button. So if you hit Explore, And then you open up that page, what Pat was just talking about. You see here, it says more ways to explore an Atlas effort map. You click on that, you can have a look where people have been. But we are going to be talking about that far in more detail next week. So register for next week. Any other questions? Bruce, Pat, can you share the steps of downloading data to the map? Yeah, it seems quite a few. Pat, you might have your own solo webinar about how to personal eBird map, mate.
Yeah, I can. Is that meaning like the Kaka and the Tui maps, or the personal one? I mean, it's basically the same thing anyway. It uses the same method, and I'm happy to write out some steps or something and share them.
Yeah, Bruce is saying not now, but one day.
Okay. Yep.
Just trying to make sure that we get all these questions. Thanks very much, Catherine, Abby, Annette, Grant. So talking about a bunch of ducks flying over me, not knowing what they were, and I thought I used the Duxpa. That wasn't available when you searched on the full taxonomy. I'm guessing that was probably on the app, because yeah, I've noticed that you can only find that on the portal. So that's something that you can just make note of, and then when you go back into it, you can go back into your checklist online, either through your phone or when you're back home, Grant, and just put those Duxpa into your checklist online, because sometimes it is easier to find the SPA on the portal rather than searching through the full taxonomy. Janet saying she got a bit lost a few times, so we'll look at the previous webinars. Yeah, that's what the recordings are there for, so that you can go over stuff, stop it, rewind it, go over stuff, and just replay.
And Janet, we're more than happy for you to email us in between webinars or later on to fire any questions to us too. So don't feel it's just these webinars where you've got us. At any stage, email questions.
Yep. Jean, sort of talking about, can you see the distribution of 2 species on Explore Maps? My recommendation would be that, have you answered that, Mike?
No.
Oh, no. Would just be having 2 windows open and just having a look at them side by side. Or if you can, then you're a genius like Pat, you can download the data and do that yourself if you wanted to. Pete is asking, is there any way to physically print off a block of squares and have a hard copy to identify the boundaries when traveling through an area? Yes, there is. So Pete, if you go to the actual website, the Atlas website, and go to the Help Center, there are downloadable topographic maps for each and every individual square. Sam lost a lot of sleep and several years off her life producing all of those. So they are widely available. But what we would actually recommend, Pete, if you have a smartphone and you are happy, is to download something called Guru Maps. And then again, from the Atlas website, you can download a map file and put it into that. And that will then be available for you while you're out atlasing. Another thing to add to that is we are actually testing out future app versions for eBird, and they will have the grid square boundaries in when you have a look at the map on the app, which is pretty exciting. Pete, if none of that makes sense, or you want me to, or you want one of us to sort of point you in the right direction, just ping us an email and we're more than happy to send you some links. Sherry saying that she's on 40 acres and has sort of 3 different habitats. How often should you be monitoring each habitat? It's a good question. Mike?
As often as you can. So basically there's no limit to how much data you can put in. Ideally, we will consider a checklist square complete when there is sufficient data from each habitat within that square, within each season and day versus night, so nocturnal lists as well. Going forward, repeated data from the same square, so like from my backyard every single day, I do a list every day virtually in my backyard is really valuable as well. So there's no upper limit, and the more data is in eBird is better. So as much as you like.
You then went on to ask, should she be in the same spot each time?
So no, you don't have to be. You can explore that 40 acres and walk across it differently if you want to, or you could go back to the same spot and record at the same spot. So the great thing is about one of the great things about this is that it does give you some flexibility on how you want to do your birding and the length of time you want to spend there. So either is good, staying in the same spot or exploring.
Yep. Nicole was asking, she just had to pop out for the last 20 minutes. No worries, you can see this again. So the link to see this, I'll just share my screen again. So if you head to New Zealand Bird Atlas portal, Nicole, and click on About, and then you'll see on the right hand side it says Webinars. If you click there, there's this page here that has all the information about all 4 of them. There's links here to all of the ones on YouTube, so on the New Zealand Bird Atlas YouTube channel, and then there'll be links for the registration links as well. So this one will soon change to watch here when I have edited and made the recording available. It'll probably be tomorrow night, and then there'll also be a register here link that will appear probably this evening for that one as well. So that is on the portal, About, Webinars, and then you'll see the links. Oh, Sue, it's got some faint bird recordings. I'm always happy if you just email them to us for us to have a go. So yeah, by all means, we can help you identify them if you want to. Just email them through. That goes for anyone. We've had people email through asking what a species is from a photo. So by all means, just feel free to send us a message. If you've gone to New Zealand Birds online, you've gone to eBird and you can't find what it is, yeah, we'll be sure. Grant Crawford again asking, who are Birds New Zealand?
Maybe we should invite Bruce on to answer this.
Yeah, we should. Bruce, are you still there? We could invite you to be on the call and basically be video like us, be a panelist. You could explain what Birds New Zealand is from the president. That would probably be far, far better.
I don't think he's there anymore.
No, he's jumped off.
Very silent, like, oh.
It's Ian Armitage? No, he's jumped off too. It's up to us.
What?
Birds New Zealand is a community group that his main interest is studying and researching birds in New Zealand. It produces a published scientific journal called Naturnus 4 times a year, and it is the main instigator of the Atlas project. So the Atlas project is essentially a Birds New Zealand project, but you don't have to be a Birds New Zealand member to participate in it. So it really is a society for anyone who's got a keen interest in birds and bird study. Yeah, they've got a great website. Just Google Birds New Zealand and take a look.
Sweet. Sue's asking what the email address is. So it's nzbirdatlas, all one word, all lowercase, at wmil.co.nz. So it's nzbirdatlas@wmil.co.nz, and all 4 of us have access to that email. So you'll get a reply from any one of us. Oh yeah, Pat's just put it on. That's probably the easiest way to do it, eh?
No, because the chat doesn't go with the YouTube video, so it's good to spell it out too.
Any other questions? Oh, Catherine's asking, can you show again where you go to see what grids you have eBirded in? Pat, do you want to show that?
Well, you can.
You can on submit. You can on submit. When you go into the submit map, you can have a look.
Can you? You might be better to show then.
Sounds like Dan should be doing that.
I obviously did it a more complicated way.
Yeah, okay. So one way to do this, Catherine, I think it was Catherine who just asked this. Go to the portal online. You can't do this on the app. Click on submit, and then enter the sort of region that you're in. So let's just do Marlborough, for instance. And then hit enter on that, and it will take you to this page. And this is really, really great sort of roundabout way of doing it. So if you hit the satellite here and then full screen it by clicking on the top right hand button here, those 4 lines, and then you can zoom in and you can have a look where you've essentially entered checklists, and you can zoom in. It doesn't seem to like it when you do like the whole of New Zealand, so that's why I sort of picked a region, but then you can see all of the locations where you've birded. So again, just to remind, and anyone, as you say, who's listening to this, the blue dots are where you have been. That's a personal location. And the orange dots with a little flame in them, that's a hotspot. Basically, it's a sort of, it's an area that's been established as lots of birders go there, or there are lots of species that are found there, or both of those kind of things. So that's a cursory way that you can kind of have a look at where you've been birding, but it's not sort of, it's something that we want to talk to eBird about and Cornell about, as to whether it would be a possibility. But at the minute, it's not to have your own personal atlas effort map, but that I've found is a good way. So again, we're going to be talking about this more next week, but you could use that to zoom into a grid square and have a look using satellite imagery what habitats I have surveyed. So I haven't, in this one, I haven't even been to that area. So that's a cursory way of doing it. Sweet. How many people have we got? We've still got 29 people, so please do. You're going to keep on hanging on, just keep on sending me questions if you want us to show. You have to do something. We'll stay here for as long as the questions come in, but as soon as the questions stop, it's the weekend.
Hint, hint, everyone.
You go Atlas.
Elevator music.
Thanks, David. Janet, how important or necessary is it to enter the highest possible code in? Can the details cover the same info?
I'm guessing that's count, Dan.
Into the highest possible count. Oh, yeah. You reckon? Janet, is that code or count?
Drum roll.
Oh, breeding codes. Okay, so I did a little bit of research on this, and I had misunderstood them as well. So breeding codes are specific to birds in their breeding season. So at the minute, that wouldn't be applicable. So what we're sort of talking about, and a lot of those codes are specific to North American species. So you'll see there's like woodpecker species sort of related to that as well. There is a link, and if you send us an email, Janet, I can send you the link to an article talking about the breeding codes, but they're very specific to the breeding season, and so it's not wholly necessary to put in breeding information throughout the year, but you can. So say you see like a nest with eggs in, or you see some chicks in a nest, or you see chicks being fed, by all means just select that breeding code if you want. But you don't need to always enter that. You just, don't worry about it.
So Janet, I probably only put a breeding code in, it would probably be less than 5% of my checklists. So it's only those times when I'm 100% certain I've seen breeding behaviour of that particular species, and a nest, a bird carrying food, things like that. So even I seldomly use it. and I probably shouldn't say this, I'm quite biased. I mostly do it to native species. But you didn't hear that from me.
Yeah, so if you just wanted to put in a comment into the comments field of your checklist, feel free to add that, Janet, if you think it's of worth, essentially.
Cool.
No worries. Thanks for
Cool.
I think we're
Yep.
we're off attendees, so we can finish it for the week.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And, yep. Cheers, team.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week. And yeah, take care. Be safe.